There's a deep irony in the relationship between a narcissist and an empath. The one who seeks control always believes they are the center, the conductor of the emotional rhythm. They manipulate, redirect, and push the other into the role of the savior, the one who will always stay, forgive, hold on, and try to understand them no matter how much pain they cause. But they forget one crucial truth: the empath has limits. And when that limit is crossed, the only thing left is silence. When an empath enters no contact, cutting off all communication, the narcissist doesn't just lose someone to manipulate. They lose the mirror that reflected back the distorted sense of self they depended on to survive. Because contrary to popular belief, narcissists are not strong. They are not emotionally self-sufficient. They do not possess a stable internal identity. Their entire self-image is built upon the reactions and presence of others, especially the empath. And when that emotional supply is cut off, what happens isn't just sadness, it's an inner collapse. Many people ask, why does the narcissist panic when abandoned, even though they were the one who pushed the other person to the edge? The answer is this: they never actually believed the empath would leave. They confused patience with weakness. They mistook compassion for dependence. They believed that no matter how cruel they were, the empath would always come back. Until they didn't. And in that complete silence, no texts, no explanations, no fights, no tears, the narcissist is forced to face their worst fear, their own invisibility. In this video, we'll explore why narcissists collapse when empaths walk away in silence. We'll go deep into the psychological mechanisms behind narcissistic collapse, how the loss of emotional supply triggers an identity crisis, and why no contact is more than just a protective act. It is a clear declaration of awakening, inner strength, and the empath's return to self-worth. It's not difficult to recognize a narcissist if you can look beyond the mask they wear. At first, they often appear confident, charismatic, and influential. They know exactly how to make others feel special, chosen, even saved. But once that initial glow fades, what remains is a psychological structure built on control, manipulation, and a deep hunger for emotional power. Narcissists don't love with their hearts, they use others to reinforce their self-image. They constantly seek to be at the center, to control the emotional tempo of the relationship. When something goes wrong, they rarely ask themselves, what did I do wrong? Instead, their question is always, what did the other person do to hurt me? In their internal world, blame always lies outside themselves. That's how they protect the fragile illusion of a stable self. What makes narcissists dangerous isn't their overt behavior, it's how they subtly redefine someone else's emotional reality. They don't tell you outright that you're wrong. They make you question your own perception. Their manipulation doesn't need to be loud. It lies in those moments when they make you apologize even though you were the one hurt, or when their silence causes you to doubt your own worth. Behind this manipulation is a hidden truth. Narcissists do not possess a stable inner self. They don't truly know who they are without someone else acting as a mirror. External validation, whether praise, admiration, or even negative attention, is what maintains their self-structure. They do not exist emotionally in the way healthy individuals do. They need someone else to play the supporting role so they can remain the star. And that's exactly why they are drawn to empaths, people who naturally listen, understand, and sacrifice. In the empath, the narcissist finds the perfect mirror, someone patient enough to tolerate inconsistency, sensitive enough to adapt themselves, and compassionate enough to forgive every wound. This is not love in the mutual sense. It's emotional survival disguised as emotional intimacy. A dependency masked as autonomy. Narcissists operate from a chronic state of inner deficiency that they never admit. They lack the ability to self-regulate, to emotionally anchor themselves in times of distress. Instead, they use others as emotional supply, a source of temporary relief from the growing emptiness within. Every controlling act, every criticism, every moment of explosive affection followed by sudden coldness serves one purpose: to maintain the connection, not for closeness, but for control. The tragic irony is this: the moment the narcissist believes they fully own the other person is when they're at greatest risk of losing everything. Because once the empath sees the imbalance, the one-sidedness, and chooses to walk away in silence, the narcissist's entire power structure collapses. Not because love has been lost, but because there is no one left to confirm their existence in the way they require. This collapse doesn't happen with noise or drama. It unfolds quietly, deeply, like a slow-motion implosion. When the empath, once endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving, suddenly disappears without a trace, with no reaction, no explanation, the narcissist enters the psychological state they fear the most: invisibility. And for an ego that has no core, invisibility is indistinguishable from non-existence. That is when the mask begins to crack. There is no one left to maintain the illusion that they are powerful, admirable, or emotionally untouchable. No one left to reflect the roles they've carefully performed: the victim, the hero, or the wounded soul. All that remains is themselves and the emptiness they've spent a lifetime avoiding. To understand how a narcissist can survive in a relationship where they offer nothing but control, we must look to the other side of the emotional scale, the empath. Unlike the narcissist, who relies on control to feel valuable, the empath defines themselves through their capacity to love and heal. They don't seek attention, they seek connection. They don't manipulate, they sacrifice. And for that very reason, they often become the ideal target for a narcissist, not because the narcissist appreciates them, but because they know this is someone who will always try to understand me, forgive me, and fight for me. The empath carries within them a deeply human desire to help others become better. They believe that if someone behaves badly, it's because they're hurting. If someone is cold, perhaps they're afraid. And if someone hurts them, maybe it's just unhealed pain speaking through broken behavior. This belief makes the empath admirable, but it's also what leaves them vulnerable to falling into cycles of manipulation without even realizing it. Narcissists don't choose weak people, they choose strong but compassionate ones. They don't want someone who will resist immediately. They want someone who will endure, who will try to understand, who will attempt to save the relationship. And empaths do that well. They are the safe harbor the narcissist returns to after every storm. They are the one who texts after a fight, the one who apologizes even when not at fault, the one who holds on to a broken relationship, just because they believe it can still be fixed. The problem is that patience is not seen as love, it is seen as submission. Each time the empath forgives, the narcissist doesn't feel grateful, they feel powerful. Every time the empath softens, the narcissist reinforces their belief: no matter what I do, they won't leave. This imbalance creates a toxic loop. The deeper the empath loves, the more they endure, the more they endure, the more the narcissist pushes them away from their own sense of self. The empath begins to lose their intuition, to doubt their emotions, to reshape their needs in order to fit the dynamic. Eventually, they no longer recognize whether they're in love or just trying to survive a relationship where they're always at a disadvantage. What's painful is that the empath doesn't realize the full damage until they're exhausted. Not because they're naive, but because they carry a deeply human emotional blueprint that everyone can change, and that love, if strong enough, can reach even the darkest parts. But they forget one essential truth: change only happens when the other person wants to change, not when your suffering forces them to. And at that breaking point, when the empath realizes that one-sided love is erosion, not sacrifice, their entire perception shifts. They no longer try to explain things to the narcissist. They no longer seek one more honest conversation. They withdraw their presence. They choose silence. And that becomes the awakening moment, when the empath finally stops trying to save the relationship and starts trying to save themselves. The decision to go no contact with a narcissist is not impulsive. It is the result of countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and episodes of self-questioning. The empath doesn't leave out of anger, they leave because they can no longer afford to lose themselves any further. What makes the decision powerful is this: it doesn't require an explanation. No tears, no convincing, just complete silence. And in that silence, the narcissist loses something they never thought they would: emotional power. There's no reaction, no pleading, no one left to pull back into their manipulation game. Only a void where once the empath stood, loved, believed, and waited. To outsiders, no contact might look like a firm boundary, but to the narcissist, it is a total withdrawal, not just of a person, but of an entire emotional system that once sustained their fragile sense of identity. And that is when the collapse begins. No one enters a relationship with the intention of having to leave in silence, especially not the empath. They love with their whole heart, give with trust, and stay with hope. But even the strongest hearts have a limit, and that limit is reached in the moment when love becomes a burden and hope turns into a blade. The moment of awakening doesn't arrive with drama. It comes quietly, usually after yet another argument, another round of blame, another stretch of silence that feels all too familiar. But this time, something inside the empath doesn't want to react anymore, doesn't want to explain, doesn't want to figure out whether the other person is hurting. They feel only one thing: too tired to keep trying. That awakening is not the moment they stop loving the other person. It's the first moment they begin to love themselves more. And for the empath, this shift is anything but easy. They've grown used to putting others' needs first, to enduring rather than confronting, to trying to understand even the most illogical behaviors, just to keep the relationship from falling apart. But now they realize Real love isn't about suffering in silence just to keep something broken intact. This is an inner turning point. It doesn't come from logic, it comes from pain so deep that it activates a survival instinct. The empath finally understands, if they don't leave, they will disappear inside the very relationship they once thought was a place for love. And with that realization, they make a decision the narcissist never thought possible. They vanish, in silence. No announcement, no warning, no explanation. No contact is not a power move. For the empath, it is a matter of emotional survival, the final boundary to protect their identity, dignity, and whatever remains of themselves. After too many attempts to speak but never being heard, to love but never being met, to forgive but only be wounded again, they realize silence is the only language a narcissist cannot distort. This decision is not easy. The empath often feels guilt, hesitation, and wonders if they are being too harsh, if the other person is hurting because of the sudden withdrawal. But slowly they begin to understand, kindness does not mean self-destruction for someone else's comfort, and empathy should never be the reason to sustain a relationship built on imbalance. No contact is the simplest act with the most profound power. It carries no accusation, no revenge, no need for the other person to understand or admit fault. It simply says, I no longer want to be part of this story, and I don't need your permission to leave it. It is the choice of someone who has endured enough, seen enough, forgiven too much, and now chooses silence as an act of final self-respect. To the narcissist, this is incomprehensible. In their worldview, anyone who loves deeply cannot leave. Anyone hurt will return for closure. Anyone in pain will need an ending. But the empath, once awakened, no longer needs closure. They need distance. Because in the end, this withdrawal is not the end of love. It is the beginning of self-love. The empath does not leave to get revenge. They leave to survive. And when they disappear in silence, it is not just a goodbye. It is a complete disruption of the control cycle the narcissist has relied on from the start. For the empath, no contact is not escape, it is evolution. And this evolution does not need to be validated by others. It only needs to be known by one person. I have been hurt enough, and now I choose me. When the empath walks away, the narcissist doesn't collapse right away. At first they go into denial. They believe it's just another tactic, that the empath is sulking, trying to make them feel guilty, and that, just like before, they'll come back. They wait, but something strange happens. No messages, no apologies, no reaction, no anger, no tears, nothing. And in that silence, the first thing to crack is the illusion of control. For the narcissist, maintaining control in the relationship isn't just a habit, it's the foundation of their sense of existence. They exist through how you react to them. They define themselves through your gaze, your love, your anger, even your fear. And when all of that vanishes, they enter a state that psychology calls identity collapse. Narcissists do not possess a solid, resilient sense of self to withstand emotional isolation. Their ego is a shell sustained by narcissistic supply, admiration, conflict, emotional reactions, even resentment, as long as they remain the center of someone else's emotional universe. No contact is the act that completely cuts off that supply. The result isn't just disappointment, it's inner panic. The narcissist doesn't understand why their usual manipulation strategies no longer work. So they try again, sending messages, making calls, playing the victim, spreading false narratives, posting cryptic status updates, or jumping into a flashy new relationship, all with one goal: to trigger a reaction from the empath. They don't want to apologize, they want a response. Because a response is proof that they still have power. But when silence continues, when the empath doesn't reply, doesn't explain, doesn't come back for one last closure conversation, the narcissist enters a psychological crisis they cannot articulate. They may become erratic, one day expressing affection as if nothing happened, the next day insulting or smearing the empath's name. They may break down emotionally, fall into anxiety, depression, or escape into addiction, all to avoid the growing internal void. And none of these reactions come from lost love. They come from lost control. This collapse is particularly brutal because narcissists are never prepared to be left. In their minds, they are the ones in control of the narrative. They are the ones who grow tired, who walk away, who abandon. To be left in silence by the empath they once saw as dependent is an unbearable blow to their pride. Psychologists call this narcissistic injury, a fracture in the false self-image they've worked so hard to protect. And because they can't face this truth, they rewrite the story to protect themselves from the abyss of self-awareness. They tell others the empath was crazy, unstable, toxic, abandoning them for no reason. It all serves one purpose: to hide the fact that they were the one who got left. But the more they spin these stories, the more their insecurity shows. Because deep down they know. This time the control is gone. And without control, they've lost the only thing that made them feel worthy. The narcissist hasn't just lost a person. They've lost the last mirror that reflected the illusion they lived in. And for someone without a stable emotional core, that loss is psychologically devastating. They don't know how to repair, they only know how to replace. But no one can replace the empath, because what they lost wasn't just a relationship. They lost the entire ego structure they had been surviving on. There's a brutal truth in relationships with narcissists: the chaos is never accidental. It is intentionally created to blur boundaries, weaken intuition, make you constantly doubt yourself, and force you to rely on them for a sense of emotional stability. This is how the cycle of emotional abuse works: idealization, devaluation, control, manipulation, apology, and then it begins again. And within that cycle, silence has never been safe. Silence means loss of control. Silence is what the narcissist fears most, because in silence, they can't manipulate, they can't rewrite the story, they can't reconstruct their image through someone else's eyes. That's why when the empath chooses complete silence, chooses no contact, they're not just ending a relationship. They are dismantling the entire operating system the narcissist relies on. And what makes this action so terrifyingly powerful to the narcissist is that it has no cracks to exploit. No arguments. No tears. No begging. No reaction. No explanation. Nothing to control. The empath's silence is not punishment. It is an unspoken declaration. I am no longer playing this game. And when delivered with calm certainty, that declaration becomes a seismic shift, one that shatters the narcissist's illusion of power. In the narcissist's inner world, their very existence depends on eliciting emotional reactions from others. They cannot bear becoming invisible, because invisibility means they no longer have any impact on the world around them. And in the invisibility created by the empath's no contact, the narcissist is finally forced to face themselves. No one left to blame. No one to mirror them. No one to control. It's important to be clear. No contact is not the same as giving the silent treatment. It's not the manipulative tactic narcissists often use, withholding communication to provoke anxiety and pursuit. The narcissist's silence is about control. The empath's silence is about boundaries, about limits, about endings. It is the door closing with no need for a goodbye. And that's what makes it such a radical act of liberation. It doesn't break the abuse cycle through resistance, but through withdrawal. Not through winning, but through refusing to play. The empath doesn't need to teach the narcissist a lesson. They just need to leave the stage they never agreed to perform on. In that silence, the narcissist will thrash, grasping for reaction, trying every tactic from seduction to threats, from victimhood to aggression. But the more they try, the more they're forced to confront a bitter truth. No one is watching anymore. They no longer have an audience. And a narcissist without an audience is a person standing on the edge of ego collapse. Meanwhile, in that same silence, the empath begins to hear themselves again. The inner voice, once drowned out by blame and manipulation, finally speaks. That they deserve peace. That love is not a series of apologies. That their emotions don't need permission to be valid. And that withdrawal is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. Silence, when born from awareness, becomes the most profound refusal of all. I no longer live inside the story you're trying to write. After the empath cuts off contact with the narcissist, a new chapter begins. But it's not one of immediate relief, not the explosive joy often portrayed in stories about escaping a toxic relationship. Healing doesn't begin with happiness. It begins with pain. The empath doesn't leave because they stopped loving, they leave because they can no longer afford to keep losing themselves. And so, the silence after no contact is not just protection from the narcissist, it is also an emptiness they must now face, alone. That space is filled with sadness, a sense of failure, self-doubt, and the haunting question: what else could I have done to save it? In the early stages after no contact, the empath often experiences emotional chaos. They miss the good moments. They cling to old hope. They question their decision. This is natural, because for so long they were programmed to tie their sense of worth to the narcissist's presence. They learn to survive in the emotional highs and lows created by the narcissist. And when it all ends, they feel like they've been thrown out of a system they lived in for too long. But at the very point of that collapse, a quiet rebirth begins. Little by little, the empath starts to hear the inner voice they were once forced to ignore. They begin to see that what they once justified no longer makes sense. That being insulted was never normal. That manipulation isn't a symptom of deep pain in the other person, it's a conscious choice. And most importantly, that love does not mean tolerating repeated harm. Recovery isn't linear. Some days the empath feels strong and clear. Other days they cry over a message that never comes, a sudden memory, or a vague longing. But this time, they don't suppress it. They allow themselves to feel, because they know every emotion acknowledged is a step toward healing. During this time, the empath begins rebuilding the boundaries that were once violated. They relearn how to say no, how to protect their mental space, how to decline without guilt. They begin to examine the relationships around them, noticing which ones are healthy and which are covert emotional dependencies. This is the stage where they let go of the role of the healer for others and start becoming the protector of themselves. And then, at some quiet, uneventful moment, they wake up and realize the narcissist is no longer the center of their inner world. They no longer feel the need to explain why they were hurt. They no longer crave to be understood by someone who never truly listened. They no longer live in the fantasy of a love that could have been if only the other person had changed. Instead, they start living for themselves. They pick up the books they once put aside. They reconnect with friends they had been isolated from. They rediscover parts of themselves they had forgotten while trying to please someone else. They begin to tell the difference between genuine love and attachment disguised as passion. This healing is not about going back to who they were, because the wound has already reshaped them. But that very wound also sharpens them, makes them deeper, stronger, not colder but clearer. Clear about their worth, clear about their boundaries, clear about what they truly deserve. And with that clarity, they no longer need revenge, no longer need to win, no longer need the narcissist to regret anything. Because the greatest victory is not in making someone else suffer. It is in no longer letting pain dictate your life. There is no goodbye more painful than walking away from someone you once gave everything to stay with. And there is no act more powerful than leaving in silence, not because the love is gone, but because you've finally learned to love yourself more. The empath doesn't walk away because they're cold, they walk away because they're depleted. Not because they lack forgiveness, but because that forgiveness has been twisted and exploited. Not because they no longer believe in love, but because they've come to understand. Real love does not come with manipulation, emotional abuse, or prolonged emptiness. And the narcissist, whether they admit it or not, feels that loss. But what they lose isn't just a partner. They lose the only person who ever truly saw them behind the mask. They lose the only mirror that ever made them feel real. And when that mirror is gone, all that remains is the emptiness they are unequipped to face. No contact is not the end of a relationship, it's the end of an illusion. The illusion that love means endurance. That kindness must be unconditional. That silence is always a sign of weakness. The empath doesn't need to win. They just need freedom. Freedom from the endless emotional roller coaster. Freedom from psychological games that drain their spirit. Freedom from depending on someone who cannot or will not respond with sincerity. And from the deepest stillness of that silence, they find themselves again. And perhaps there is no voice louder than the silence of someone who once loved you with everything, but in the end chose to walk away without looking back.